Welcome to Know It, Live It. I am your host, Laura Hansen Breksa. Each week I have an insightful conversation with a fascinating person who shares their life mission, determination, passion, principle, or spiritual journey. And today I'm sharing a conversation I had with Shawn Dunning of Shawn Dunning Consulting. Now he has this coolest logo I have ever seen. It is a light bulb with the globe on it. It's so cool because he represents ideas for a world that works for everyone. He lives and teaches collaborative problem solving. I'm not going to introduce him anymore because he's going to tell us all about himself and what he does. Thank you very much for agreeing to be on Know It, Live It. Shawn, we've known each other for about 7 years. I met you at Toastmasters, Toast of Richmond. I was very impressed by things you'd say, and I just had to have you on the show. You believe there are solutions for problems, and you do something about that. And I think that's fantastic. And one of the things you believe in is that there is solutions to conflict, but we don't have to sit in conflict and keep that going. And it's fantastic. I don't think everybody does that. I think people wish people get along, but they let it fester. But you actually do something about it. I want you to tell me what collaborative problem solving is. Describe that to me.
First, Laura, thanks for having me. I think this is a fantastic platform that you developed, and I'm really excited to be here. Collaborative problem solving, well, it depends on what your understanding of the word collaboration means. So let me just lay that out. From my line of work, and my background's in communication and psychology, and I did my graduate work in conflict resolution. So from a more of an academic standpoint, collaboration refers to not just putting things together and working with other people, but really working toward win-win solutions so that if you and I are at odds with something, but we need to solve a problem, we find a solution that ultimately works for both of us, or if there's more than two of us, for all of us. And, that sounds way too good to be true, and sometimes it is. But the fact of the matter is, when we don't try, we're sure not to find it. And so what really fuels me, what really kind of gets me going and has kept my career going for 25 years is working with people to help them co-create solutions that work for everybody. So collaboration, and kind of from a standpoint of conflict styles, is one of 5 fundamentally different types of styles that you could use to address problems or conflict. So one style could be just to simply avoid, just not deal with it. Another could be to accommodate, I just let you have your way. Another could be to compete. We're all quite familiar with that, which is, game on, I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. I'm going to make sure you lose. And, that's how I'm going to solve the problem is for me, and too bad about you and everyone else. Another popular approach that you hear, the word gets out there a lot, sometimes used by politicians, is to compromise. And I actually think compromise is for losers. I don't aim toward compromise, because really to compromise means you need to give in some, I need to give in some in order for us to both get some. But nobody really gets everything that they want. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times for that, and there are times for all 5 styles to be used. But it's that 5th style, collaboration, where we work toward a win-win that I'm talking about when I say collaborative problem solving. And we aim for that, but we might fall short. Maybe we end up in some sort of negotiated agreement where it's more of a compromise. Fine. Maybe we decide, well, let's just set it aside and come back to it later. But ultimately, what I'm working toward is finding win-win solutions for everyone, and that's what collaborative problem solving is about.
A real win.
A win for everyone.
So an example would be, and I actually have a little thing I do for conflict between teams of 2 people. So in my example, it's 2 people painting a room. One wants it red, one wants it blue. And one of the solutions is I can't remember what I call it, but they're C's. I try to be cute with the letters. Instead of them competing over which painting it all red or painting it all blue, they paint red flowers and blue flowers. So they each have their way. But then another way is they decide their real goal is to paint the wall so it's beautiful, and they come up with something completely different. There isn't even no red or no blue. I think they end up painting it with blue, like bees or something completely different. Is that what you could end up being, where neither one ever gets what they came up with being because they think of a bigger goal?
So I like that example because it's kind of realistic. It's not some contrived example. It's a very real scenario where you might be at odds with what you want. But what you're onto there is to find out what the underlying reason is for why someone wants what they want. So rather than just saying blue versus red, if you want to do collaborative problem solving, you need to dig deeper and get below the surface and investigate, well, what is it about red that you like? Now, that might sound foolish to even ask. Someone might just say, well, I just like it. It's my favorite color. They might say, I just want to brighten it up, or I want something striking, or who knows what. Or maybe it's not that they wanted it red, but they have the idea of red flowers in mind. I don't know. And in fact, I don't know is really the way I go about solving problems. And someone comes to me with their question, with their issue. If they start to ask me, Shawn, what do you think the answer is? I always say, I don't know, but we need to find it out together. And so the way we do that is we investigate. And in that example, are both parties happy if they have red flowers and blue flowers in some sort of different background? Maybe. Ultimately, the best win-win solutions are those that nobody can think of ahead of time, that they actually co-create. So at the end of a constructive collaborative process, they arrive at a decision that everybody likes. And so, I think your example might work, but depending on who the parties are, I don't know. Someone might just have a thing for red and they insist that it be red. And so maybe it ends up more of a compromise or they have to roll the dice. So, but if you want the best possible solution for a win-win, you've got to dig deeper and find out why they have the position they do.
That leads me into the next question is, and what will it take to bring more collaborative leadership in politics?
Boy, you're just going to jump right to politics, huh?
I am going to jump right into that because you have a vision of what a world that works for everyone. I know you have that vision, but you brought up, we started talking about opposite or people invested in what they want. And that's what politicians do. They come with an agenda. That's why they're politicians. That's the game, as far as I understand it. So, how do they bring this collaborative process of communication, which seems what you're saying is the key? How do we bring that more collaborative leadership into politics?
So it's true. For many years, I've been saying that my sense of purpose in life is to work toward a world that works for everyone. And understandably, some people roll their eyes and say, "Well, that's nice, that's cute," and they write me off as naive, and that's okay. I get it. I would think I was naive too if it had not been for the experiences that I've had in my life. Remarkable lessons that I've learned from people all over the world that have taught me that we are capable of more than we realize individually and collectively. I spent 10 years of my life working with an organization called Search for Common Ground, doing international peacebuilding work in about 40 different countries. And did we solve the world conflict? No. But on a micro level, kind of in a petri dish, I witnessed time and time and time again what we're capable of. I worked with Palestinians and Israelis for 6 years. Now, unfortunately, they're not the ones running the region right now, the ones that I worked with. I'd like to believe if the ones I worked with were running the region right now, it would have a different outcome because I've seen the transformation that happened between people who saw each other as mutually exclusive, you or me, to now dreaming toward a world that works for both of them. So I know it's in our heart, our human heart. I know we're capable of it. It's not just imaginary. It's not theoretical. I've witnessed it. However, I've never witnessed it taken to scale. And something that really occurred to me when I was living in Jerusalem for a year and a half. In fact, my first daughter was born there. I have no ties other than doing the work there. But I was so immersed in it that it hit me like a ton of bricks one day where I realized, we don't really need to teach people how to get along because it's in our DNA. It's in our just human makeup to be able to do that if given the opportunity. And the most consequential thing about the context is leadership. And what I came to realize is we don't need to teach people how to get along. We need leaders who allow people to get along. And we need leaders who convene people who disagree with each other in an effort to find solutions for everyone. And again, don't get me wrong. I don't believe there's always a win-win to everything. But what we see out there in society, and especially amongst our elected leaders, is a gosh darn fight. It's you or me, my party or yours, my tribe or yours. Where are the leaders saying, hey, we all need to come to the table and work this out? And hey, at the end of the day, I'm going to represent my party, my tribe. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But as a first step, how about a genuine attempt to dig deeper and find out, is it blue or red that you want, or is it flowers on the wall that you want? Like, what is the real reason that you have the needs that you have? And we might just find more win-win solutions are available. We're not going to get there if we don't have leaders who try. So it's that realization, and after doing years of work, that fueled me into trying to do a little experiment, frankly, to see if I could bring collaborative leadership into politics. Don't get me wrong, I don't have some grandiose ideas of running for president or something, but why not city council or mayor of a small town in the United States? And so I did that, and we could talk about that. But I think what's going to change, what will be a sea change, is when those whom we elect to solve problems are doing it collaboratively. And I think when they do so, it'll set examples for others. And hopefully it will become a norm that we solve problems through collaborating rather than fighting.
Wouldn't that be nice? Even in your home, even in small scales, your home, your street, and as it gets bigger. That would be so sweet if we could solve problems. So what would that look like if you got to that point? What if the biggest dream, if it could really happen, what would a world that works with everyone look like? On a world and do smaller. Tell me what do you, I mean, I can imagine what it would look like, but what does Shawn Dunning imagine it would look like?
Well, I think in fairness, I don't know, but I know it would be a world where everyone's needs are fundamentally met. And we're actually a lot closer to that than we were decades or centuries or millennia ago. I really think the norm in the world, and maybe we get this mistaken because of social media, and we're constantly shown bad things that are happening because news is new. It's different from the norm. The norm is that we're actually getting along fine, most of us. But what's news? Oh, this bad thing that happened over there, the shooting that happened there. That's the exception to the rule. I really do believe the rule is most people of, what are we at, 8 to 9 billion, 7 to 9 billion? I lose track. Billions and billions of people in the world. And the reality is, most people are actually getting along fine. Most people's fundamental needs are met. And yet, I think we know that we're not as far along as we could be. And this vision of a world that works for everyone, I believe in my heart is possible. But I'll also say, I'm not certain we're going to get there. I know we're capable of it, but I don't know that we won't blow ourselves up first. So for me, it's a moral question of where do I put my time and effort?
Mhm.
And for me, it's working toward that vision where everyone's needs are met. And I think it fundamentally starts with leaders who are entrusted by society to make decisions for them, to solve problems for the greater picture, for those leaders to be leading collaboratively. And you can look at this from a micro level down to what's going on in your neighborhood, all the way up to, county, state, federal, national, regional. But everywhere you look and see problems, we need to be asking the question, are leaders inviting people to the table who don't agree
Mhm.
with them in order to solve problems? Or are they only interacting with people who support their specific unilateral vision? Diversity is simply an array of differences, right? And those differences could be associated with all sorts of different factors that we commonly think about. We could look at things like race and age and gender and profession and personality and all these things. But whatever the issue is, whatever the problem is that needs to be solved, we need to first ask who's involved in that, who's associated with the problem, whether they're creating it or suffering from it, but who's within that container of people associated with the problem. And if we are not including all perspectives, fundamentally different perspectives within that container, then we're missing out on diversity. And I think sometimes it gets kind of misunderstood and sold kind of cheaply, or like, oh, well, we have 5 people that match that thing, and we have 5 people that match that thing, and therefore we have a diverse group. Like, no, not necessarily. So we got to kind of work backwards and consider who's all involved, and are all the different perspectives considered. I live in Richmond, California, which is a city of 115,000 people from all walks of life. And, that term is what comes back to me again and again, all walks of life, right? So that accounts for so many different types of difference. But when I was running for office and considering, addressing problems that we face around, just safety and cleanliness and commerce and whatnot, and I would say, look, we need to get everyone to the table. I didn't mean that we need to get all 115,000 people to the table. But if you take any given issue, let's look at police and police reform, let's look at business taxes and these different issues, you're not going to find 115,000 fundamentally different perspectives on that. But you might find 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, right? So I don't need to get 115,000 people to the table, but I do need to make sure those 3, 4, 5 or 6 or maybe 10 different fundamentally ways of looking at things are involved. And from a collaborative problem solving standpoint, we're not done until we find a solution that all those perspectives are satisfied.
Mhm. That seems like a big mountain to climb.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the mountain to climb because my master's thesis in graduate school was a model for adventure-based conflict resolution.
Really? Tell me more about that.
So, I said a little bit about conflict resolution, collaborative problem solving. Well, another big part of my life that I've really enjoyed is outdoor adventure.
Mhm,
And, in fact, I just got back from a climbing trip to Yosemite, rock
mm.
climbing. And, people might think, oh, that's a thrill sport. It's an adrenaline junkie thing. Not for me. What it does for me is it's attitude training. I think most people can relate to the idea of looking at something, say it's a rock or anything else, and your gut check is, I don't think I can do that. It's not possible. So if you look at something and say it's not possible, well, if you're rational, you're certainly not going to try because why would you? Already discounted it as not possible. But imagine trying and maybe you get part way, maybe you get farther than you thought. Maybe you actually get all the way to the top. The point is we achieve more than we realized we could. And, a lot of adventure sports have a way of kinesthetically encoding that within you. And for me, that's what climbing and a lot of outdoor adventure sports do. It's a constant reminder that, wait a minute, maybe there is more possible than we realize. And if you take that mindset, that philosophy, and apply it to conflict, then hopefully you realize when you and I are stuck and the solution is like the top of the mountain. If I just count that immediately as not possible, well, then I'm not going to try. I'm going to resort to forceful tactics. I'll get a lawyer, I'll fight, whatever. But imagine if you just take that first step forward, just like you take a step forward climbing a mountain, not knowing for sure if you're going to make it, but believing that maybe it's possible. And it's that step by step process where we learn more about each other, more about possible solutions that we didn't consider before. And maybe, just maybe, we get all the way.
Oh, that's fascinating. I know my daughters had gone on high adventure team building things that are outside. Sometimes you have to depend on each other, like you were saying, because you won't make it without each other.
Yeah. In fact, the work I did with the Israelis and Palestinians, a lot of it was utilizing wilderness expeditions. And these weren't kids, these were adults in their 30s and 40s. But we went, whitewater canoeing, backpacking through the mountains of Spain and Croatia. We did some rock climbing together. And it was through those activities that we used to reflect on the relationships that were being developed and potential for a different world that was being imagined. So yeah, very powerful stuff.
So this idea of obstacles helping team building and collaborative problem solving. What have you done with obstacles that have come in your way in your personal quest?
So I've been thinking of a book. A lot of people, I've had some really remarkable experiences and I've been encouraged to write about it. And I never really thought much about it because I'm not sure what difference it would make. But I got an idea lately about writing a book called Failing Hard at Things That Matter. So suffice it to say, yes, I've encountered many obstacles. And I guess the cliche thing to say is every time you fail, you should learn from it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think there's something bigger to that, which is doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, whether you're sure you're going to succeed or not. And I think that that's the way to encounter obstacles is not to see it as an end. So let me give you an example. So I ran for office here in Richmond back in 2022. I ran for mayor. Pretty presumptuous thing to do, given that I had no previous experience in politics and virtually no name recognition. And so there's a big obstacle. What are you going to do? Well, I do believe that just about anything is possible, but for a price, right? It's like just wanting to get to the top of the mountain doesn't get you there. You got to do something to get there. So I knew I had to pay the price, and it wasn't about money. I could have raised millions of dollars and I don't think it would make a difference. But what I did do is I got out there and I ran like Forrest Gump through the streets of Richmond. There are less than 300 miles of streets in Richmond, and I ran 530 miles. And I literally went to every single address in Richmond, California, over 30 square miles. And I met 5,000 people face to face. And it was remarkable. I have one of the most amazing experiences of my life, meeting so many people, so many different kinds of people from all walks of life. And from a political standpoint, it worked. I mean, pretty much everybody I met who was a voter, I think, voted for me. When the final numbers came out, there were 4 candidates in the race. The winner had about 10,000 votes. I had around 8,000 votes. And no previous new candidate in the history of Richmond, like an unknown name like myself, had ever gotten more than, 1,500, maybe 2,000 votes. And so I must have done something right. But unfortunately, the third place guy, whom I did better than, he got enough votes to prevent me from winning. So it was kind of bittersweet. It's like, wow, I did really well, but it still didn't work out. So I thought I was done at that point. Like, okay, I gave it all I had, but I started realizing just how remarkable that was, and that I never made any political promises to anybody other than I will listen. I will invite you to the table, anyone with your perspective. We need to work together. That was my whole platform, was collaborative problem solving. And I realized people wanted it. So I considered again, and I ran for city council last year in 2024. Rather than trying to reach 30,000 people over 30 square miles, I'm now focused on about 7,000 voters in 2 square miles. And in that 2 square miles, I ran over 300 miles. I made these little Post-it notes that had my contact info on it to say, hey, let's connect so I know how to best represent your interests. And I delivered that Post-it note 10,000 times to
Wow.
4,500 voting households. So in terms of paying the price of working hard, I'm pretty sure I ticked that box.
I think so.
It still didn't work. I think I had a really, really good chance. By all indications, there's not a lot of media around here, but by all indications, I was doing very, very well. I was endorsed by so many prominent people and former mayors and council members of surrounding cities and unions. I mean, everything was looking in my favor. And then 10 days before Election Day, the opposition mounted this massive coordinated smear campaign.
Oh,
They
man.
paid people to go door to door and tell lies about me. They sent out mailers that insinuated a lie. If you're really smart and don't want to get sued for libel, don't say that somebody said or did something. Say they want something. Well, they sent out this mailer that said, Shawn Dunning wants to give major polluters and billion-dollar companies tax breaks. Completely 100% fabricated. Never did I suggest or believe anything along those lines, but they can say what they want, and it worked. It was very, very effective.
Oh,
So
man.
there's an obstacle for you. I could get down and depressed. And to be honest, to be quite frank, I became quite disillusioned
Mhm.
about all of this. And yet it's a confirmation. This is how politics works. And, some people will say, well, Shawn, you got to play dirty too. And I won't. I'm not going to. So the question is, what's next? How do I deal with these obstacles? I'm certainly learning from it. But one thing I've learned is that most voters, I believe, are relatively uninformed, are unaware, and at the same time, easily duped by misinformation. We're all subject to it. You get some really expensive printed mailer, you must think there's some truth to it. Cynically, I think people would say, no way, politicians can't be trusted. And yet they keep voting for politicians. So, I don't want to be bitter. I am a little disillusioned. And yet the way my brain works is, okay, what can we learn from this? What can we do more? And so I'm not giving up on this quest. It's just I'm kind of, regrouping, retooling, figuring out how can we take these lessons and apply. Maybe the next time we talk, I'll have some ideas for you, but I'm still working on that.
It's really interesting that that experience that you had, which was completely unfair and wrong. The honorable thing to do would think, oh, hey, he's really best for city council. Let's let him win because he's really best for the city. They just wanted to keep their position because why would you be so nasty if it wasn't defensive?
It's absolutely about power, and I'm the idea that I'm saying, hey, wait, I want everyone at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just kind of scratch their heads and go like, well, but Shawn, that's not the way it works. And I say, well, that's the way I work. And it turns out that voters who got a chance to meet me and trust me really wholeheartedly dug into
Mm-hmm.
that and believed it and supported it. And I did very, very well. But to the majority of voters who are, they're not going to meet and greets. They're not reaching out to a candidate. They're not having conversations. They're not doing their homework. They just open up the ballot and vote, or maybe they get influenced by mailers. Democracy only works if you have an informed electorate with reasonable debate. And I think that's what's missing. That's missing on a local level. It's missing on much larger levels as well. And instead, democracy has become a marketing contest, subject to whatever fancy psychological tactics work better to get someone to check the box a certain way. But I'm fully convinced that most voters do not realize the implications of what they're actually voting for.
So, building on that, collaborative problem solving not only takes a lot of communication, which is what I'm hearing is the basis of that, Am I correct in that?
Absolutely. You can't collaboratively solve problems without communicating effectively.
But it also takes energy and effort for the people who are in the conflict. People sometimes like conflict. You have people who are invested in keeping the conflict going, and people are sometimes just too lazy. So, how do people like people making decisions for them. So, how do you get all those people to come to the table, or do you just leave them aside?
So, yes, collaboration is harder than a lot of the other ways to address problems. I believe the biggest obstacle to collaboration is the mental barrier to it, which is based on a lack of experience and understanding of what collaboration is really about. So if people don't know what it's about, they might think, you're just trying to appease them to win. I'll give you an example back to politics. I was talking to this guy in the neighborhood. I could tell that it just some things he said, I could tell that he was favoring the other candidate. But I love talking to everybody and I'm there to answer all questions. And he's like, okay, he's going to give me a chance. And he says, well, okay, so tell me about your platform. And I told him about my platform, which was about safety, fairness for everybody, cleanliness, and welcoming environment. And I went in detail about some of the stuff. And he looked at me and he's like, well, yeah, but that's what everybody wants. And he said that in a way that, like, clearly he's not going to vote for me because I'm working toward things that everybody wants. Now, he didn't say it directly, but if you were to kind of go down that road, you might came to the conclusion that he's looking for someone who's going to fight against something that he doesn't want,
Mm,
or maybe fight something that he wants that he thinks maybe I don't know.
mhm,
But people see as a blood sport, as you're with us or against us. So what side are you on? They immediately try to feel you out. Are you friend or foe? And so when someone shows up saying, hey, think about an issue that you and your neighbor disagree on, I'm representing you and your neighbor. So if you're going to vote for me because you want to find out if I'm on your side,
mhm,
what does that say about your neighbor?
mhm,
So people kind of there were people in house parties who would say to me, Shawn, I'm sorry, you're a great guy. You're really nice, but that's just not the way it works. I can't support you.
mhm,
And then a week later, I'd get a call from them and they'd say, and this happened on many occasions. They'd say, I've been thinking about what you said and this is what we need. Can you bring me a yard sign? So it's hard on the uptake for people who have not experienced it. And it's really hard when campaigns are about sound bites and quick ideas. You get 1.2 seconds of somebody's attention. Well, what works in that 1.2 seconds is communicating whether you're friend or foe, right? Are you bad guy or good guy? But what's hard to communicate in a very short amount of time is that you really are there for everyone. And again, the problem with that is we just don't have examples of that. So we have a bit of a chicken and egg problem here. My belief is that if you get people into consequential leadership, decision-making positions who truly, truly behave collaboratively in the way that I've been discussing this, then what you get is an opportunity for people to experience it. So that's what really was motivating me. The holy grail here was to get elected. And then, even if it was by a hair, then to start engaging people, knocking on doors after the election because, hey, you know what? I think your perspective needs to be at the table. And people start to realize that their voice matters, that they see their perspective included, not just heard, but actually leveraged within problem solving processes.
mhm.
And then we start to get to a point where people understand through experience what collaborative problem solving is about. I believe if that happens, we'll see a sea change. We'll see other candidates who then run for office in the same way. And it'll be a competition of who can collaborate more effectively rather than who can serve their special interest more effectively.
Okay.
But I
Yeah.
think we're a long ways from that.
So you're once the collaborative problem solver is the winner, then people will wanna be the winner, so they'll adopt that template.
Yeah, and yet they have to be able to do it. I've heard it's really interesting is after my mayoral campaign, I started noting which, I did not succeed. I did not get elected. But those who did get elected, I noticed in city council meetings that I was monitoring, the word collaboration was coming up a lot more than it ever did before. And yet they didn't demonstrate it. There was one council member who actually engaged me to help behind the scenes with an issue where we found a really kind of inspiring, creative win-win solution of something worked out very confidentially behind the scenes on an issue between the police department and someone who had been wronged by the police department. And so it can happen. And there was one council member who was a champion for that. But, the mayor who acknowledged that people, that I had a large following and people wanted collaboration. And he kind of he said he was going to be collaborative. Sorry, anything but. I mean, things would be put on the agenda that were clearly, one-sided, and it was a war, maybe a nonviolent one, but a war. Very little genuine attempt to actually bring people together who don't see eye to eye. So, and that can actually do a danger. If people think that someone's a collaborative leader and then that's what they experienced, then maybe that's what they think collaboration is about. So again, we have a chicken and egg problem.
I think people do default to being taken care of.
What I'm talking about could be seen as participatory or deliberative democracy where people are directly involved. And I get that. I know that a lot of people say, look, I don't want to be involved. I'm just going to elect somebody who makes good decisions. But it begs the question, what's a good decision? And if their only rubric for deciding if they're good decisions are that the candidate is going to come down on yes or no issues the same way the voter does, to me, that's really cheap and short-sighted. It doesn't say anything about problems that we haven't yet discovered and how they're going to be solved. So, I would like to believe that more voters will get wise to this and realize we need to hire, we need to elect people who employ a good process for solving problems, regardless of what position they fall down on. Again, the problem with politics is we see everything in this binary light of take your issue X, Y, or Z, and you're either for or against. And I think we need to evolve beyond that, beyond leaders who are communicating positions to leaders who are beholden to a process that ensures the best possible outcomes are found. But again, we're nowhere near that yet.
No process, just stances. So one of the things that you shared, shifting gears here, one of the things that you shared in a Toastmasters talk that I just have held on to is the beginnings of your being mentored. You heard a speech at a high school. You're going to correct me if I got the story wrong. I know. You heard a speech at an assembly in high school. You were like impressed by the speaker and you reached out to him to be your mentor. So I'd like you to talk about how you knew this path was right for you, how you just started to live it. You reached out to him. He called you back, and I want you to talk about you starting your consulting business, where that's taking you. And then I want you to tell me more about this job as United States Southport Station team trainer, because it sounds like a cold job that brings all the warm feelings. So please take me on that journey of how you've and where you are.
Well, I'm impressed that you remembered that. That was almost 10 years ago, probably. That I gave a speech about that, and I haven't thought about it much. The person you're talking about his name is Kevin Wanzer, and he's a really talented motivational speaker. And yeah, he came to our high school. I mean, it was my junior or I think my senior year in high school, and he was just really entertaining and really engaging and really genuine. And just by the way he showed up, it inspired me to want to be able to do something similar. I remember writing a paper in college on, I think the topic was what's a hero, and I remember writing about, I think a hero is someone who does something that you would want to do. And I saw this guy as a hero. Like, wow, he's just the way he engaged this diverse audience. And high school kids are pretty tough to get on their side. Anyway, and yeah, against all odds. I mean, he was like pretty well known, famous, and with some speakers bureau and really, high paid, busy, blah blah blah. I sent a letter. And this was before email. I sent a letter and didn't think much of it. And then it was Christmas Eve. I get a call. He's like, "Hi, this is Kevin Wanzer." Whoa! And I in my letter I had asked him would he be willing to mentor me so that I could do a speech for my senior project in high school. I do a motivational speech. And he must have been really touched by that. And he offered to do it. And we engaged in faxing notes back and forth and some phone calls here and there. And I ended up doing something else for my senior project, but I did give a motivational speech to my old junior high school with Kevin's mentorship and help. And yeah, I stayed friends with him over the years. He's an amazing person. But actually, when I think about my career, I mean, it's true. I do a fair amount of public speaking, but I don't market myself as a speaker. Really, my passion is collaborative problem solving, consulting, whether it be training, facilitating. And I think if I were to go back to a point where that started, it's probably my also junior or senior year in high school when I was in math class one day and there was a knock at the door and someone came in and gave a note to the teacher. And the teacher looked at the note and looked up at me and said, "Shawn, go to the office, go to the principal's office." And everyone kind of snickered. They figured I was in trouble.
Good.
So I get my bag and I go out the door. I go to the principal's office and I go in. The secretary waves me through, says, "Go to the back." I get to the principal's office, and the principal's just like, at the end of his rope, he's like, oh, thank God, Shawn. They're all yours. Two kids had just gotten in a fist fight,
Mm.
and the principal had summoned me to mediate between them. Now, this was not an officially sanctioned thing, but I guess suffice it to say that my desire to help people get along more effectively somehow showed up. I mean, I was a peer counselor, and so there was some kind of, title there, some role. But the idea of pulling me out of class to mediate between students was not really an official thing. I tend to think of that as kind of the beginning of my career in peace building and conflict resolution. And when I went off to college initially in mechanical engineering, of all things, problem solving. Yeah, but it didn't feed my soul, the way people problem solving does. It only took, less than a year at Cal Poly to switch from engineering into communication and psychology. And I'm so glad I did. And then after college, I traveled the world for a year in this international group where, I traveled with a cast of 130 people from 25 countries, and we put on a Broadway style show, and we did community service, and we lived with host families and really got a taste of the world. And it was then that I decided, okay, I definitely want to go into conflict resolution as a career, international conflict resolution. And I applied for the best school in the world that I could find. It was at the time known as ICAR, the Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. I applied and I moved, and I arrived in Virginia and I was not accepted. But that
That's
didn't
not
stop
well.
me. I ended up getting an internship at Search for Common Ground, who I ended up having a great career with later. I waited tables, I substitute taught, and over that year of establishing residency, it actually worked out well because when I did get accepted a year later, then I paid in-state tuition. I think I can say that now without getting in trouble. So sure enough, I went to grad school, got a master's in conflict analysis and resolution. And at the same time, I started doing a lot of corporate consulting with a company called Adventure Associates, with whom I later became a director and COO before ultimately starting my own business and just being an independent consultant. But so I've been very, very fortunate to be able to live on purpose and I've made decisions where I had to take, a 50% pay cut to move across the country to join Search for Common Ground. But it was totally worth it because it was on purpose for me. And I have to pinch myself. I've been able to actually do conflict resolution, peace building, collaborative problem solving work for close to 25 years. And you asked me about the South Pole crew. So that's one of my more interesting clients. I'm now in the 7th year of preparing South Pole winter over crew members for South Pole Station. So Antarctica, big continent. Well, the geographic South Pole is 800 miles inland. And during the winter there, which is February through November, the crew members, usually around 40 to 45 people, are completely 100% isolated. It's 100 degrees below zero outside. There's no planes that can come and go. They are stuck. And what I love about it is that they are also a microcosm of society. You have all sorts of different people from all over they're mostly Americans, but you have some grantees from universities in other countries sometimes. But you've got your astrophysicist who's exploring the origins of the universe, and a doctor, and then you've got a plumber and a heavy equipment operator and a cook. And then you've got, your IT specialist, and within these different job functions, you also get so many different personalities. And I just love the process of helping them prepare to work well together. Because one thing when it comes to conflict, you cannot do at the South Pole is avoid.
Mhm.
You and I might not be getting along and we could just look the other way. But if you're in a small, closed environment, you've got to work together. If there's an issue, you've got to find a way to deal with it and get past it. You cannot avoid for 9 months. And so that's probably one of my most interesting clients. I also just recently wrapped up the 18th year in a row of leading the Leadership Academy for the Society of Nuclear Medicine. It's a professional society of nuclear medicine technologists. And I've been absolutely honored to be able to help in their leadership journey, which has turned into basically alumni of this program becoming elected members within their professional organization. And then I'll do, nonprofit board retreats. I'll do, work with tech companies, with pharmaceutical. I'll work with anybody, frankly, as long as the goal is to help people learn how to get along more effectively. And so that's that.
So what's one of the first things you do when you meet with a group of people? I'm imagining it might be varied, but give me an example. Maybe there's pre-work, but when you meet with the people and you walk in and there's the group, what do you do?
Well, it depends on the goal. If it's If it's kind of an open enrollment thing where people don't know each other and they're just coming to get skills, that might be a little bit different. If it's an intact group that has to ultimately work together, like with the South Pole crew, I'm doing a variety of icebreakers, and but really it's a series of collaborative problem solving challenges. So I will do now with them, I do a pre-deployment training in Colorado that goes on for several days. And it's a blend of, classroom stuff. I might do a teach piece on conflict styles, but then we'll do an activity where they have to actually solve a problem together. And, we'll kind of bounce back and forth between what I will call discovery versus practice exercises. Discovery exercise is where you just kind of throw them into something and see how it goes. And then you reflect on it and learn and figure out, well, what worked, what didn't work. Okay, now here's some tips on effective communication. Take that into account. Now let's do another activity. And so there's this process of improving skills development for sure. But then by virtue of how we're doing it, it's positive, it's a shared experience, it's very memorable. They're also encoding these important lessons that will come in later. Most new groups that come together for a purpose of a common goal will initially show up getting along very well. And so it might not make sense to be talking about conflict. They might think, oh, we don't have conflict. We don't have to worry about that. But what I need to do is prepare them for when the conflict will inevitably arise later. And so positive, memorable, shared experiences that build on lessons that allow you to practice important skills around feedback, just various communication skills, but certainly collaborative problem solving kind of as an umbrella. And yeah, but if I have 2 hours, that would be different than if I have 2 days or 2 weeks. So it really just depends on the goals of the group and the context that we're in.
You have to be, well, you have to be very flexible and know a lot of skills so you can apply them in a lot of different situations. That comes with all that experience that you have and the knowledge and the education, and you're goal driven and you're learning as you go.
Always learning, always learning. That's the thing about this kind of work is it's never boring, ever. I can do the same activity with 10 different groups and have 10 different experiences. And yes, I know what the goal is, but even groups of people where there's a returner, South Pole crew, for example, there's some people that have come back multiple years. And so I'll be doing a particular problem solving challenge with them, and someone will have already done it before, but they didn't do it with this particular group of people. And so it's a new experience every time. And it's new for me too. So much of my work is about observing and modifying. It's not cookie cutter. For people who want a detailed agenda minute by minute, I probably really drive them crazy because that's not the way I operate, but I am extremely focused on what the objectives are. Okay, so I want to make sure we address crisis communication. I want to make sure we address effective feedback given and receiving. I want to make sure we address, conflict resolution, various skills. But how we get there might depend. It's like this particular theme is kind of naturally coming up right now. I'm going to go with it. So there's almost a bit of improv that goes with this. It's very exciting, very interesting, never boring.
So I'm wondering, they say a teacher affects eternity because they never know where their influence stops. I'm imagining that's how it is with the skills you teach, because they're lifelong lessons. You may never see the end result, but as far as the results you see, how satisfying is that? How does that feel?
I would like to believe there's lasting results. A few years ago, we had a reunion with some of the alumni of the Society of Nuclear Medicine leaders. And it was a 10-year reunion of folks that had been through this leadership academy 10 years ago. And I don't often get that opportunity to meet with people who I worked with so long ago. And so I was really excited to, someone came up and said, oh, it's great to see you, Shawn. I still remember the workshop we did. I said, oh, what do you remember? And they said, oh, I remember that activity where, we had these loops of string around our fingers and we had to get untangled. And I said, okay, that's great. But what lesson do you remember from that? And all of a sudden they're going off and like, well, I learned that we need to really observe everything carefully and not make assumptions. And when we feel stuck, to believe that there's another way forward. And sometimes you need to ask people around you for what they see. And I'm like, wow, that was really touching. Another example, when I was working with the when I was working with the Israelis and Palestinians, there was one very, very challenging experience that we had one time in Croatia, where it's a bit of a long story, but the short story is we got hit with a massive storm that we did not expect. about half the group wanted to just ditch it and evacuate and go home immediately. And the other half wanted to stick with it. So we had a classic conflict there. Well, I applied collaborative problem solving 101, and I was entrusted to facilitate this conversation about what we do. And by the end of it, I started off by saying, look, I'm going to do my very best to make sure everyone's needs are met. But what is it you need? One person stood up and said, Shawn, thanks for everything, but you must evacuate us now. Get us out of here. I said, okay, what will that do for you? What do you need? And he said, well, it's dangerous. We're not ready for this. And I said, oh, so you need to feel safe. Is that right? I said, well, yeah. And, someone else stood up and said, Shawn, this is great, but look, you need to evacuate us, get us out of here. And I said, okay, great. But what would that do for you? And he said, well, we're wet, we're cold. So I said, oh, you need to be warm and dry. Is that right? And this goes on a bit. And someone else stands up and says, hey, why do they get to dictate everything? I think we should stay. And I said, okay, well, what would that do for you? And he said, well, I think we should, finish the goal that we set out to accomplish. So everybody gets a chance to speak. And then I reframed the problem for them all. And I said, look, I don't know what the answer is, but does anyone have an idea of how we can make sure we're able to finish what we started, but feel safe and warm and dry? And spontaneously, people started taking out extra clothes and handing them to each other. And it was almost laughable because it's like, well, why didn't you share that extra rain gear like an hour ago? But, we agreed to ultimately make it through the night and revisit this conversation in the morning. And in the morning, we looked at a map and discovered that this emergency shelter that we had just somehow accidentally found, turns out there were many of them throughout the mountains in Croatia. And we just simply retooled the itinerary. Instead of going here, we went such that there would always be an emergency shelter within walking distance. And we finished the expedition. It was a huge success. And that was, I believe, in 2012. So 15 years ago. And just a couple of years ago, I was in the region meeting with a bunch of these folks, and some of whom were on that trip. And I asked them, what do you remember? And this one rabbi with kind of a gleam in his eye, he said, I remember there's what I want and there's what I need. And others, reflected on it. And I know in my heart that experience will stick with these people for the rest of their lives. And so I'm very honored to have a part in that. Now, again, looking at the big picture, there's horrible, horrible, horrible atrocities going on in Gaza right now. It doesn't matter what side you're on. If you care about humanity, you have to realize that what's going on there is just horrible and unconscionable. And it's sad to me that, it's happening. And we have people who are in charge who are not leaders for the whole, who are not leading collaboratively. So on one hand, and this is a very long-winded answer to your question, but on one hand, yes, I'm very touched. I feel that I've made a difference in some lives, but I'm not done yet. I want to make sure we're doing everything we can. It's not about me doing something. Put it this way. There are a lot of people out there who can do what I do a lot better than I do. Maybe I'm just the one crazy enough to try to do things like run for politics with it. So who knows? Maybe that'll spark someone else who does it even better. But I know that this is who I am, and it's what I'll be doing until the day I die.
Thank you very much for doing what you do. I believe in you, and I'm glad you're doing it. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for doing this, for making a platform for this type of thing, and it's such an honor to be here. If anyone out there wants to connect, I've got a pretty basic website. It's ShawnMDunning.com. I'd love to collaborate with anyone who also shares this type of vision, and who knows what we might accomplish together.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Know It, Live It. Visit knowitliveit.net for the latest scoops, recaps, and more. Remember to subscribe to this podcast so you'll never miss an episode with fascinating people who live what they know.